Welcome to the Women of Regenerative Ag podcast. This is a platform for the extraordinary women leading the regenerative agricultural movement and the transformation of our societies around the world. They are on the ground, creating critical shifts in seemingly intractable and highly unsustainable systems, and they have been doing so for a long time. I'm Aurora Flynn, creator of the show. In this series, we look to explore beyond the soil to the underlying theme of transformation itself across size, scale, multiple dimensions, from that very internal landscape of human consciousness to the outer manifestation in the world around us, be it in the form of agricultural management practices, tools, and techniques, to culture, economics, policy, as well as the built environment. This series is a joint venture with Soil for Climate and my own organization, the Outer Borders Agency, where we work to help transform the human social infrastructure and the built environment to create truly resilient and regenerative societies. These recordings originally aired as interactive live stream interviews on social media. They were held during the initial months of the U.S. COVID lockdown, and due to limited facilities, we sometimes had to get creative with our locations and dealt with the occasional technical issue. Please enjoy these incredible women. You're listening to the Women of Regenerative Ag podcast. My guest today is Amber Smith, Program Director of Women in Ranching for Western Landowners Alliance. Women in Ranching provides transformational space for women to support human synergy around envisioning what is possible in agriculture. Amber has been ranching in rural communities for 14 years with her husband and 2 young children. They currently steward 53,000 acres known as Antelope Springs Ranch in eastern Montana. Her passion is rooted in building a future where rural families thrive and all people are empowered and supported in pursuing work that aligns with their personal goals and deeply connects them to their community. Her time studying in the Middle East and 6 years as activity director for a rural nursing home helped her develop a unique passion for creating spaces of dignity, joy, and acceptance. Let's dive into this. First of all, how are you and your family doing with everything that's been been let loose in the world in the last few months of our lives in regards to COVID?
One of the privileges of caring for land and livestock is every single day the needs are there. So whether it's checking water for cattle or moving cattle to fresh grass or checking on the kids and I have what we call our little goat family here in the barnyard, a pile of Nigerian dwarfs that are about ready to kid, and going out early and checking on them. It helps us stay grounded in a time that doesn't feel very grounded. And, honestly, when we head into town is when you start feeling that things aren't like they used to be. I'm a board member of our local senior center, and we met a couple weeks ago and are trying to reopen. And so looking at what policies we need to change and what about the building we have to change in order to reopen. And the director's comment was, life is different and it's never going back. So we need to take actionable steps so we can reopen the senior center. And it was the first time I had anyone say that and actually felt the brevity of that reality. Things have changed, and here we are. Yeah. And yet, the things that we do and the life that we care for remains significantly important.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I think that was something that dropped in for me this morning, getting ready. I was just sitting there and I had this moment. I was like, it's never going back. And it comes in waves, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, and we know for multiple sort of feedback loops and issues that are unearthing with the destruction of ecosystems, that this was one of them. And now that we've hit it and it's the first in our lifetime, it's really not going back. It's a whole new saga. We completely resonate with that. I want to give people a little bit of context to understand, a bit more. And I love your choice of words there. You said you're stewarding 53,000 acres, and I can hear that that's intentional. So I'd love to know and share with everybody a bit about your operation, about what you're doing there.
Yeah, so we were on the eastern side of Montana. You know, when most people think of Montana, they think of trees and rivers and mountains. And we instead are rolling grassland prairie with beautiful hills with rocky outcroppings and badland areas that are painted pink and yellow and orange. And most people look at them as sustaining no life, and yet gumbo lilies and horned lizards and all sorts of things make their home there on those gumbo hills. So we actually leased this ranch from a landowner who's not based here in Montana, but we are aligned with the vision for this place and the vision for the property. And all of us rest in the recognition that by managing the livestock in a different way, we're altering this landscape positively. And it's pretty awesome. We've been here 8 years now. This spring, my husband's comment was, you know, I have nothing to back up this statement, but things just seem more alive. You know, and as you know, from working with ranchers, it's that anecdotal, that ability for your eye to start seeing that change, coupled with, you know, we have a third party that does our soil and plant monitoring here. And so we have the statistics to back that up, but yeah, it's just absolutely a privilege to be here. And I actually grew up in central Illinois in the middle of corn and soybeans. So my children are being raised in a way that didn't exist for me. My whole childhood was spent hiking and camping and longing to have a horse. And now every day my kids are out helping us put up fence and riding, and they long for the days when they can sit inside and watch Mary Poppins. It's you know, that's just how it is. But actually, when we're done here this morning, we have a whole wonderful crew of neighbors and partners across Montana who are here. We've had delicious and extravagant amounts of rain, so we weren't able to drive out for our cattle work today. So everyone trotted out. There was, I don't know, 30 to 40 people out trotting. And so after this, the kids and my daughter and I will saddle up. My son wants to be on his dirt bike, and off we'll go to enjoy this life.
What a dream. Hard work, but a dream. And it's a lot of passion in that kind of lifestyle and play. Actually, that was one of my questions for you for sure. That's quite a legacy that you're coming from. When did you first start noticing the soil in that relationship?
So I would say one of the aha moments for me, you know, and we had been here 6 years and practicing holistic management and planned grazing and grazing with rest and recovery in mind. And one of our good friends was here. We had a tour on the ranch. His name's Tony Malmberg. He and his wife Andrea ranch in Eastern Oregon. And he was commenting on this little stand of cottonwood trees that was coming up that were between, you know, 6 inches and 3 feet. And his comment was, you know, grazing prior to Trevor and Amber's management kept that life, you know, it was really like the neck of this land was being stepped on. And so the full expression wasn't there. And then when this land is given time to rest from grazing, things like cottonwoods and willows start appearing in the strangest of places. And he talked about how often you're on a ranch and you see the same generation of trees. And until you start seeing multiple generations, you know, that's a reflection on the grazing management. And we had spent many years on a different operation. And my brother had flown in from Tennessee, and we were driving out to the ranch. He goes, God, all the trees here are dying. What's with all these dead trees? And I just didn't have the eyes to see that all the trees were of the same generation.
Yes.
Yeah, that was years. And one comment to wake my eyes up to, oh, look, look what's happening and look what's going on. And so we now have 8 years of generations of cottonwoods, particularly cottonwoods, and in a few wonderful places, willow, reintroducing themselves. And, for dry, arid land, we typically get anywhere between 8 and 12 inches of precipitation a year. So being able to see that life expressing itself is really exciting.
So to help people understand a little bit about sort of management strategy, first of all, would you say you have a particular management strategy that you've utilized, like holistic management, or that's one of the collapses that happens quite frequently? Like, are you grazing for sort of land focus or more like animal and body scores and stuff? And if you could explain that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So we definitely have a dual approach. We're managing the land in a way that when you're moving grazing animals across the landscape and giving that land time to recover. So let's say you have 4 pastures and you start in pasture 1 and then you move to pasture 2. Well, when you've moved off of pasture 1, that allows that grass and those plants time to recover from being grazed. And these lands evolved, these grasses evolved with grazing animals, but those animals were moving. They weren't set in a place. And, once we colonized and homesteaders came here to these Western rangelands, we started breaking it up with fence. And so then animals were stuck in one spot, and that land, when it's continuously grazed, those plants don't have an opportunity to recover from that grazing pressure. And so with holistic management, you're planning your grazing and you're moving your livestock. And here we've been planning for a full growing season of recovery. So every pasture that we have gets one full season of rest while it's allowed to graze and produce seeds, and those seeds fall back onto the soil surface. And then we'll move into those pastures at different times a year and trample, some of that is trampled down, some the animals graze.
No,
it's easy to go down a rabbit hole.
It's a really important distinction to how, and you've illustrated it really beautifully, sort of this spectrum of sort of evolutionary presence, right? And I think that's where what we really miss is sort of that ecological story that was running prior to our lifetime. That really impedes.
And then Aurora, you asked about if we're managing for the land or managing for the livestock. And I had said it's dual. So my husband and I, we do have a cow herd here, and then we custom graze cows and calves, and we custom graze yearling cattle, and we custom graze ewes with little lambs. So we also have a sheep herd here. And so in order for us to make an income to remain on this land and take care of this land, our animals have to be thriving and being able to, breed back and nurse babies and also be full of life. And you can definitely push things ecologically and allow your livestock to decline, but that doesn't make sense for the whole picture, because if our livestock decline and we lose our grazing clients, then we're not here able to steward this. So it's really looking at, that whole piece that in order for us to do this work, we have to be able to make an income. And the only way you can make an income is if those animals are thriving with your management. So it's really, it's an art. You can plan and you can monitor, but then you often have to reconfigure. If your animals are showing that they're not comfortable and they're dissatisfied, then you need to make some changes and move them a bit quicker. And this year's been easy because it just keeps raining, and so everything's happy. The grasses are happy, the animals are happy.
Gorgeous.
So this year, as my husband says, we look like geniuses, and it's really good.
The earth knows what she's doing.
Yes.
Yeah, no,
Yes.
it's and I feel like that's a whole nother rabbit hole we could get into, and maybe on another show, the idea of, just what animals eat, when they eat it, when they want to eat it, what can you actually adjust them to meet that sort of ecological tending that may need to happen during succession to get them to go after invasives that they may not be used to eating. That's a whole art and science and behavioral management in and of itself. So none of these are ranching always sounds simple, I think, to outside, for people who aren't on the ground. And the moment you get on the ground, you're going, wow, there's a wealth of rabbit holes and things to really consider.
Yeah.
And it is that brilliant flow of art and science. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You were talking about breakdowns in the food systems. We were talking about the challenges that ranchers are seeing, or actually sort of these opportunities for ranchers who are doing 100% grass-fed, grazing for ecosystem, restoration, seeing some benefit to the awareness that's happening, but also revealing what was already present, which were a bunch of bottlenecks in distribution, and slaughterhouse access. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, I think, like every industry, agriculture has moved towards high efficiency and high productivity. And we've all been really well trained to have those two things in mind all the time. And unfortunately, when you only focus on that, a lot goes by the wayside. So ecological health, the way humans are being treated through the system, the way livestock and animals are being treated through the system. And it's hard and it's complex. And I will say, it's really comfortable for my husband and I at this point when, it's fall and our calves are weaned. We can load them in a truck and drive to the sale barn, and, we're price takers. You get what you get, and you might be disappointed, but at that point you can wash your hands of it. However, if we move towards a more regional system, which I think is possible, but it's going to take financial investment, it's going to take a lot of human creativity. There is potential and there are options. And we're, with cattle prices down so low, my husband and I are talking with all sorts of partners and trying to figure out some different marketing avenues for our animals, which in the long term is the right way to go. But this is something we've talked about, Aurora, is making those changes, and how fear can be wrapped up in change, and how sometimes even if things aren't good, it's what you know, and it's easier to stay with what you know than be the person stepping out and doing something different than the rest of your community, or than how things have been done for 3 generations on your operation. I think COVID brought a lot of things to the surface that all of us who are in the industry know, those potentials, and that breakdown is there, and you just hope it doesn't happen.
Well, Amber,
because it's scary.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would be really helpful for community to understand where the breakdown is. Like, can you talk about, you're moving the cattle from being grass fed? Are they grain finished, or they're 100%? And where are you taking them after that?
Yeah, so Right. So we custom graze a lot of our cattle. So we have cattle going through all different sorts of situations. And currently, the livestock coming off of this ranch mostly are grain finished at the end. Um, and from a producer standpoint, if you feed livestock grain, you're you're shortening your time of risk. If we're finishing cattle on forage and on the land, you're increasing by quite a lot the amount of months and the amount of days that the animals stay on the land, which increases for you as the owner, it increases your risk. And so for a lot of people, your calves are born in the spring, you run them through the summer, then in the fall you sell them, and you get your check, so that's your one check for the year. And then those calves are moving into a feedlot situation typically through the winter. Then the following spring, they're put back out on grass and then typically finished, that last fat is finished on grain. And again, that's efficient. It's very efficient to do things that way.
I think,
But
right. Well, so, I mean,
yeah.
I think we should just not be fearless here to kind of talk about the but. So, you said to me when we had talked, we were talking about there's no such thing as cheap food, right? And we're
Mm-hmm.
talking, and it's not just externalities like what happens to the ecosystems, but it's like who's actually working in slaughterhouses of that
Yeah.
size and why that doesn't
Yeah.
work in
Yeah.
as a distribution in times of COVID
Yeah.
or otherwise. And I loved your awareness on that. That's more where I was headed to, with
Yeah.
where the
Yeah.
breakdowns are.
So, we're employing people, mostly of color, in our processing facilities that we can employ cheaply, and we can train them on specific minute tasks. So one cut. So you're standing in the assembly line making one cut, and these people are then, when COVID started popping up in the slaughterhouses, and there was all this conversation about safety for the workers in the slaughterhouse, my mind immediately went not so much even in the work facility, what's going on, but if you're thinking about what these folks are being paid, and more than likely they're living in small housing situations all clustered together, for the opportunity at the American dream.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Not good. That's,
And
yeah.
yeah,
So one of our biggest,
we as an industry, we've done a really, really good job of separating all the players from each other. So the ranchers, no ranchers, the guys working in the feed yard, no feed yard, the folks who are processing know their skill. We've separated all of it and we've uncoupled it from community. And so things are moving across large spaces and no one through the value chain is connected. And so if we can recouple those pieces and bring those conversations and all of those players so much closer, yes, I'm sure you lose some efficiency, but what you gain back is connected community and people being able to know and understand how their products are being raised and how they're being handled through the chain and who's doing the handling, and being able to honor all of us through that system and being able to honor the final consumer of the product. We've lost that as we've chased productivity and efficiency. And, it's been so long, I think most of us don't even remember. And so where I grew up, we had a small Amish community, And so on the weekends, we would go on a Saturday and we would buy our meat there, and we're driving past all of these farms and all of these people are out working. And my family, built that relationship to place and to our food. We would go out in the summer and pick strawberries in the fields, which is one of my favorite memories of childhood, is having these buckets of gorgeous little strawberries are meant to be small strawberries that we would weigh and pay cash for and come home. So that was my reality of where my food came from. And when I met my husband, we were working on a guest ranch, and we introduced ourselves to each other, and he said, "Oh, I'm from a ranch." It's like, a ranch? I didn't understand or know there was such thing as a ranch. And so right away, my mind is like going to Clint Eastwood and John Wayne, and thinking like, oh, so this exists, which I'm sure you can imagine my husband thought was hysterical. But I hadn't pieced together, I lived in country where people had farms and they had 20 to 50 head of cows, and I didn't understand that there was a whole, industry built on cattle and grazing. Yeah. So it is certainly complex, and I think agriculture has so much room for entrepreneurship and new visioning and people coming in from different sectors. The challenges are great, but the opportunity feels unlimited.
Yeah, I think that's I think part of the externalities and the cost of of what we call what you were saying about cheap food, and about is that we really don't factor in the quality of human life as well. And so what that is, and that's a socioeconomic legacy, that's a cultural legacy that's really expressing itself in the separateness of the jobs and who gets those jobs and what they're paid and the lives they live. And that quality is absolutely not factored into it. And then it's ignored by the time that dollar hits, that piece of meat hits the shelf. So yeah, this is a part of what I think is part of the benefit of what's happening with COVID, is recognizing that these supply chains aren't actually sustainable. They never have been. And that there's a huge social equity cost happening when it comes to people's health and well-being. And that really does matter, not just because it should morally, but because it actually has an impact when it comes to public health, right? You don't have communities that are suffering like that and not address it and expect it not to impact the whole, because it does. And that was, part of what I really loved about what I'm hearing you guys work on over there. I'm getting a question from Seth, and I want to take you from Nick Harper. How much of the positive impact of regenerative grazing is lost when the cattle are sent to feedlots for finishing and fed grain produce in some of the most ecologically destructive methods? It's a deeply flawed model. It's a really legit question. You guys are doing extraordinary work to custom graze like that. That takes a lot of effort to have the last 2 weeks, probably last 2 weeks, to grain finish. Is this because a lack of slaughterhouse access? Why that choice?
Well, so if you look at the industry as a whole, we basically have rangelands that aren't productive enough to be farmed, and so livestock are being grazed on those. And then you have any land that is productive enough to be farmed pretty well is being farmed. So absolutely, I mean, it is a break in the system to move animals off of this and onto land that continues to be tilled and fertilized, and all of that is running into the Missouri and the Mississippi and heading to the Gulf Coast and creating hundreds of thousands of miles of dead zone that we've all just decided to accept as just a part of efficiency and productivity. And I think in order to turn that around, you know, these are conversations on policy. And so, you know, talking to farmers in Illinois, they can make a lot more money planting corn and soybeans than they can planting a cover crop and bringing on the risk of bringing the livestock in and grazing that cover crop. And it's a complete 100% shift. And part of that shift has to be the economics. So if it's not economically viable for somebody to do something, and then we're asking as a consumer base for them to do it, do you think that's going to happen?
Right.
It's not going to. And so how are we coupling this with changed policy, changed practices, changed paradigms around
Yes.
how this entire system could look and could work? And so,
Right.
you know, when I talk to producers here in Montana, all of whom are using holistic management practices, some of whom are direct marketing 3 to 10 head a year, but they're raising 600 to 900 head of calves every year because we don't have the population here to eat those cattle. And then you're asking them to take on this huge risk and they don't have a market for that grass-fed meat. I mean, does that make sense? It's this
Absolutely.
huge conversation. And so some folks have told me, you know, Amber, when you can figure out, when you have 50,000 acres of farmland in central Illinois and you have farmers willing to change their practices and plant cover crops and take our cattle on and finish them, we would love to jump into that. And when you have a market, so my cattle can go through that market, yeah, so there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of conversations. And, you know, typically ranchers and farmers, again, there's breakdowns here where there aren't conversations happening, or you have a lot of farmers who will have, you know, 20 to 30 head of cattle and finish with some of their farm crops.
Amber.
Yeah.
I think you're really, I mean, because we can dissect this for days on end. And I love it because this is really important for people to hear. Community need to understand that this is not something that ranchers and farmers strictly have control of by any stretch of the imagination. So and it doesn't fall, the pendulum does not go to 100% consumer. And that's probably a word we need to do away with, responsibility, for a variety of reasons, right? So this is why I feel really privileged and really excited, also because of the women I know, to know of women in ranching and the work that you're doing, because everything you're talking about doing is a multi-systemic shift that requires quite a few different agents, from lobbyists to a grocery store owner, to the head of the Farmers Guild, to NGOs that are helping, you know, get the word out, right, to shift that, to have
patient investors.
Yep, and people working in a space of possibility, right? Because this is hard, and it is it needs strategy. It needs multiple teammates in cultural dissemination of understanding ecosystem function and relationship. Precious Perry, the African coordinator for Regeneration International, on last week, was speaking with me about, you know, this interruption where she's having in that intergenerational transmission, and she's having to sit with people on the land again and go, what are you witnessing? Get them to understand the language of the earth again, to see what's happening there, how the systems are interacting. And most of all, to even understand that there's a degradation on a level that is not registered in one lifetime. So part of my journey, for instance, has been understanding the California Serengeti and what that was possibly like just a couple of generations ago, right? And so, and that being vitally important when we understand the potential, the panacea of what it is to regenerate soil. And part of what I loved about when we spoke was that you talked about that photograph, that really classic photograph of just going, here's holistic planned grazing, and here's what's happening if you're not grazing it or you're continuously grazing. And there's the immediate response to be like, well, do this. Just do what needs to be done to create that, please, and just do that already, right? And you had a comment about that photo that I think really summed up a huge piece that people miss when they discover the wealth of soil. You remember what that was?
Well, I will say, and this is something Elaine Padarini at Piscinus Ranch that
Yeah.
she and I have talked about, and it was her comment that really cued me in. You see those photos, and just like you said, like, make the change already. What's happening there? And she said, when she sees those photos, what she sees are, broken family, broken community, conversations that aren't happening. And so actually this fall, Women in Ranching is hosting a virtual gathering called Beyond Fence Lines, titled as such really because of that comment from Elaine. And so if we start picking our heads up a bit and looking beyond what's in our own yard, beyond what's on our own 240 acres or 10,000 acres, what's going on in our community. And what you're seeing in these rural communities is there's a statistic that 60% of land is going to change hands over the next decade. That more than half of ranchers are over the age of 60 as compared to under the age of 40. And, here in my own community, we have ranches all around us popping up for sale. And who's coming to take care of these lands, and who is going to be the next generation that comes on this place, and what are we doing if we're missing out, no matter how the prior generation or 5 generations managed before.
Right.
They have their reasons and their logic for that, and being able to sit and listen and empathize and understand, but it does not mean we move forward in agreement with that same methodology or that same practice. And being able to find a group of practice or people to support us through change and transition. And that is what I see over and over again in the Women in Ranching community, is women are coming to these gatherings and identifying with a sense of being an imposter on her land and in her community, and not knowing if what she has to offer anyone is going to desire or accept or let her bring forward. And so when you create space for people to challenge their assumptions about what they're capable of, challenge their narratives of why things have to be done in a certain way, and you allow them to identify in a new way and create a new narrative, and find a group of people who will support them in that, there is a shift. And it is strong and it is powerful. And when you hold witness to people transitioning and moving through that, and going home, and then, feeding back to each other what's happening and how it's looking, it's really exciting. And it's what keeps me wanting to be a part of this work. And today, actually, we have, I think there's 4 of our women in the program here helping on our ranch today, and 2 of them were like giggling and really excited to meet one of the others. They haven't been in circle together, and just this almost the star power of seeing another woman living out what is inside of you and what you know is there, being able to see that is transformational. And my small example, my daughter last year, we were working cattle, and one of our stock owners has a 16-year-old daughter, and she was out roping. And my little girl said, I want to be doing what Bella's doing next year. Now, she loves her daddy and she loves the other men who come and help, but I've never once heard her say, I want to be like my daddy and, you know, be able to do these things. But she looked at Bella and said, I want to be like Bella and I want to be able to do that next year. So I get to see that and witness that, and find facilitators who have the skill to hold that space and to lead women through that process. And it is a complete honor and a complete joy. And that change and that type of community is really what each and every one of us needs, whether we're a woman or whether we're a man. We each need community like that to hold us to our highest self and to hold us to our goals and to hold space for us when we create a big leap, and then we run into 27 roadblocks. Who is there to support you through that?
Well, so that, I think that really, that bookend from legacy ranching, right? So that was the flip side of, needing the ecological knowledge and the wisdom is what I see women in ranching remedying, which is an issue within sort of legacy ranching, right? You had that quote you gave that you said from Kit Farrow, ranching progresses one funeral at a time. And I'd love for you to talk a bit about that and what impedes that, and also for everybody to keep in mind that this isn't just a ranching community phenomenon, but this is when radical shifts in perspective are offered up, and there can be absolute resistance. And what is that that he's speaking to there, and that you find?
Yeah. So I was actually at a kind of a convening of stockmen types, and Kit made that comment in front of the crowd, and I laughed out loud, and then it soaked in, and I felt horrified by that comment, and yet I laughed because I could recognize it. Right? It was something I had experienced and something I had seen. And so what do we do about that? And you look at agriculture, and people are working really hard every day. They're often making a very limited income or a subsistence income. Oftentimes partners and spouses are working in town to get health insurance and to have something in savings. And so if you're able to keep a hold of your land and transition it to the next generation, even if you have hovered at break even during that whole time, the fact that you were able to do that, I think a lot of times, that's the hope, that I have someone who's going to come home and that I did a good enough job that I can give it to them. Now, you're asking that individual to start looking at their practices critically and to start thinking with a paradigm of, maybe I could make a profit. So this is the Ranching for Profit school that is so popular. All of the time you hear people say, like, that's a joke, you can't make a profit ranching. And so I just want to offer that context. I think people have this idea that ranchers are these rich, really privileged people who are just stuck in their old ways and don't want to change. And actually it's hard and it's scary. And so, you know, when people are ready to make that shift is often when they're pretty down and out, and they're going to have to change something in order to hold it all together for the next generation. And you see kids coming home. Some do, and then there's a lot who don't, right? Because it's a hard life, and you worked really hard, and you watched your parents scrape by.
Right.
Yeah, and so what I see with the women in ranching community is we have women who have been a part of agriculture for generations. We have a lot of women who are new to agriculture and coming in with so much enthusiasm and so much knowledge, often with college educations, and they're so excited. And then they butt into
Okay.
tradition.
Yes.
And there is so much good about tradition. So when you have tradition, you know your place, you know how you belong, you know the ways in which you're allowed to engage, and that can be comfortable. If you're coming and wanting to be different, tradition is going to push you back to, here is your role, here is the way in which you fit, and if you want to belong, you need to be a part in this way.
Right.
And so what I'm seeing a significant portion of women who ranch do is they're really saying, no, this isn't the way that I'm going to engage. This isn't the way that I want to caretake for this land. I want to do something differently. And that's hard, but it's necessary. I mean, we have to have that change, because if we progress one funeral at a time, we're going to be out of harvest seasons.
Really fast.
You know.
Yeah.
And we know what that story looks like, and I don't wish to live into that story.
It's one of the most challenging things right now, is sort of this paradox between increasing connectivity and belonging, that authentic presence and acceptance of other in the fullest expression of who they are, while also going, and this needs to shift. This is a boundary we're drawing now, we're out of time, we're moving, let's go forward. And that rejection is a very primal response, right? We know that sense of belonging, that's one of the indicators I use and I track in community. It has all sorts of really negative consequences when you are impacted with that feeling like you don't belong. And it's not just belonging to community, it's belonging existentially to the earth. Do you have that kind of connection? And it's belonging to self. And that's one of the most traumatic, is when you divorce yourself from who you authentically are, and you aren't able to embody that, and you're stuffing down your words, and you're not expressing your thoughts and beliefs for fear of rejection. That's a massive toxicity load. It lowers your immunity. It is really, I think, a foundation to some respects how sort of Western communities are built, quite frankly. It seems like there's a freedom of expression, but there's a lot of these underlying drivers constantly, even sometimes around being different, as opposed to it really being authentically rooted in this self. And we run the risk quite easily with sense of belonging. And this is a question I have about the women in ranching, and I would love for you to provide a little bit of structure and context for how these gatherings and how they're facilitated. Is that you run the risk of running into conformity while you're trying to achieve that sense of belonging with self. You're still going, how do I authentically, I talk about it in terms of embodiment, like when you get somebody who's rooted into their self and they're unapologetic and they're not being pulled by wanting to appear any which way. I think that's why you were talking about Ariel Greenwood, who's showed up today, who's just one of these phenomenal, I would call her a very authentic, embodied individual. And I've known her for quite a few years now. And Ariel has maintained her curiosity and her exploration of self and relationship to land in a really courageous and brave and inspiring way, but without without a need for attention or vocality. She just is being Ariel. And this is why I laugh, because I go to these fractals of like Joel Salatin, our very own lunatic farmer, where he talks about the pigness of the pig, right? Or the, you know, the cowness of the cow, that if you honor these, you know, these biophysiological processes, expressions within the animals, and you're giving them sunshine and good earth and what their evolutionary biology dictates that they need to consume in order to have these healthy bodies and these happy lives, and then you live within the sacredness of that harvest cycle, that, you know, Amber has her amberness, Ariel has her aerialness, Aurora has her aurora-ness, and when we're not full-fledged in that, you know, unbridled expression and safety of being self, we will never shift these intractable systems, because there's a lot of standing up to do while creating greater connection and intimacy. Good boundaries increase intimacy. Barriers absolutely break them down. And you set up a barrier when you're brittle and you're afraid, rather than loving, going, no, I've got you, I'm here. That doesn't work, right? That's what I see coming out of women in ranching. I would love for you to speak to all of that. Anything that you're inspired with.
No, that was beautiful, and I definitely connect at a very personal level with the things that you just mentioned. So Women in Ranching was built on the idea that when you create community, good things happen, and when you bring people together, especially people in these far-flung places who are doing this incredible work, often alone, or maybe with a spouse or partner, maybe with children, there's a lot of quiet time. And so being able to bring those women together in circle with facilitators to get them to dive deep about who are you and what do you want and how do you want to be involved in a way that is still not asking of them. So when I first participated in Women in Ranching, when I left, I came home and said it was the first time in my 15 years in agriculture that I felt heard, appreciated, and valued for exactly who I was, with nobody asking any more of me. But in that space, I was able to come alive to what I wanted to ask of myself and how I wanted to be engaging, and the skills that I bring to the branching tradition that aren't typical, and that's connectivity and bringing in unique people and unique partners and hosting conversations that are uncomfortable and need to be held. Those are skills that are deeply needed in our rural places.
I think probably most places where we are
Yeah.
reaching a level of polarity as a nation and as a globe that is staggering. And I think you're hitting on probably, I'm really curious about with Women in Ranching, Amber, one of the most, I mean, it's the whole, my best friend Amy said last night, she's like, it's the whole enchilada, right? The challenging conversations. How do you do them in a graceful, clear, and very open, grounded, direct communication that's fully responsible for emotional integrity. It's fully responsible for impact and going, yes, I occurred for you that way. Help me understand. Like, these are really seemingly basic skills that are completely lost right now in my, I mean, I look at everything I'm asked to do in the world and I go, can we actually deal with what's in the room? Which is this fundamental projection that exists between human beings of my reality imposed on yours, which creates a complete lack of clarity around a subjective truth. And I know that sounds a little convoluted. I know you speak this language. I'd love to hear also about this as well, and you know, a bit more for people about how do you provide clarity for challenging dialogue?
Yeah, and I think honestly, a set of skilled facilitators and having women who are comfortable holding that space, because not all participants are comfortable, especially right at first. I had our final group last fall. I felt I built a really safe situation with easy questions the first evening, just to slowly bring people into it. So we didn't dive too deep too quickly. And my question was, what did it take for you to arrive here today? And so we went around the group, and I actually handpicked women who had participated before. So, you know, to make it easy for the rest of the women to warm up. And all three of them just started out in tears. And I thought, what? wait. No, you're going too deep, too quickly. And that's not true. Women are just ready to go there and ready to be in community. And I had a couple of women tell me like, I'm a bit uncomfortable. There's some people who have cried around strangers and this makes me uncomfortable. And so what I explained to them is, this is a pool and there's a shallow end, there's a deep end. If you're ready to sit and just brush your toe across the top of the water, if you're ready to dive in head first, as long as you stay around this pool, that's all I'm asking. And where you're ready to jump in and how you're ready to engage, that is fully up to you. Which, that created that shift. Like, okay, I'm here and here's how I am. And actually we were on the Northern Cheyenne land here in southeastern Montana at the Wild Rose Center with April Chalfant. And she led us with several other Native women through a sweat lodge ceremony. And I told my husband, I think every human being who's about to have a crucial conversation with a group of people should go through that experience. So we all enter the sweat lodge, and there are these big jugs, Tropicana jugs full of water. Mm-hmm. And April said, you should all take a drink. It's going to get very hot very quickly. And white women and sharing water, like, so it pretty well, like a few of us took sips and it kind of went around. Well, we get through one part of the series and that flap opened up and the jug came in and we were all guzzling and water is just pouring down our fronts and women are like splashing it on themselves. And I thought, we've arrived.
Yes.
Like, we are now all equal.
Yes.
We've all come to this, and we all came in with expectations and our thoughts and our holding ourselves tight and close, and you put some biological pressure and all of that.
You are fighting. Totally. I mean, these are waves and waves, layers and layers and layers of a social fabric that has utterly restricted everything from inclusivity and equality to just going, you are me, I am you, honey. Like, I'm going to treat you as I treat myself and my soul, and I'm going to treat myself and soul as I am of that humility in the earth. And that comes generally, I find, from really what they call post-traumatic growth. I find it from the most shattered beings on the planet are the most exceptional and the most extraordinary, because they have a resiliency and a flexibility to transform that, you're witnessing within that rite of passage, within that practice of sweat. The removal and the leveling of masks and exteriors and frontage to that utter, like, I have no energy to hold that anymore, right? Illness will take you there, a grief will take you, right? And that's, it's part of my mission is that we've utterly destroyed what is a phoenix cyclical process that is very innate to the human journey. It is completely a part of our expansiveness. And we've utterly retarded it with pathologizing emotions, for instance. And that's part of what you're hearing with that beautiful woman who's going, I'm seeing people express emotion. I work with men who haven't cried since they were boys. They can't, they go, I don't feel anything, right? And of course,
Yeah.
emotions are always a part of the neurological processes. Your brain doesn't run without them. Logic is not supreme. You're in denial at that point. And if you can allow the emergence of emotions, you can garner wisdom, right? But we retard the process. We go, don't let it up. I don't want to feel it. That's about you. That has nothing to do with any type of belief pattern I've established.
Yeah.
And then you're locked
Yeah.
in and you're in that toxicity. And then there's no innovation or possibility to know what you don't even know, right? And that's all of those layers.
Yeah, and I think this this idea. So you asked about, you know, intergenerational and knowledge sharing, and you know, sitting in circle with incredible women who are experienced, who are my seniors. I'll be very honest. My assumption when I look at women like that is they've done the right things, they've made the right choices, like their life is good and successful, and it's because of their efforts. And it was actually at my first experience with women in ranching that was completely shattered for me. So I'd spent the weekend with women who I thought that about each and every one of them. And then we sat in circle, and the question that was asked was, what is your fear regarding your big leap? And a big leap is really just a personal goal. And so it's asking women to set a goal for themselves, you know, how big, how small, that's up to them. And so, you know, we're sitting in circle, and we had this beautiful rock that had come from the ocean that we were passing around. So if you weren't ready to share, you just passed the rock. But we stayed together as that rock continued to go around. And I looked at these women, you know, who I would call mentors to me, share fears and concerns and worries. And I thought, wait, so she's 30 years my senior. She is amazing. And she has these like self-limiting ideas. Like, it was crushing and awe-inspiring at the same time. And what I recognized is what I wake up to every single day, and the things I must push through in my own mind. I will have these will be my shadows ongoing. You know, they're always there. And it's once we bring them forward and acknowledge them that I think they no longer have so much ability to create harm for us, quite honestly.
Yeah, I completely. I think you're talking about something that I think is we're all responsible for, right? This cultural fabric. And I think there's something quite troubling about this predilection we're trained in, which is to pedestalize people and to be pedestalized, right? So we create projects to get attention. We want to see how many likes we get on Facebook. We want to, you know, get in this, right? We want to get notoriety. Academia for me was sort of this mass exposure to that was the ball game, right? And I thought I'd been around a lot of identities that way. And this was kind of like, you have to be on the pedestal. And it's particular, you also see this a lot with male leadership, right? Is to go, he's got to be the guy, he's got to be in the know, he's got to have all of it together. He can't feel emotion, he can't feel his heart, he can't be vulnerable because vulnerability is a weakness, right? Sissy man. Why do we like that? I keep coming back to it, and I want to go back to pedestalizing, but the pathology and the pedestalizing pathology of emotion, it's a dehumanization process, right? You have angry, hysterical women, right? Angry natives, angry Black women, like God forbid she gets hit with that. And most of the women of color in my life, that's what they're afraid of being hit with. You get sissy man, right? God forbid, you should have an emotional expression and not keep it together. I broke down in hysterics and sobs so many times in academia from the sheer force of repression of them going, do not express, do not be authentic, do not confront, do not challenge, do not expose our duplicitous behavior. that type of loss of integrity for me is huge. When I see a lack of
Mm,
professional integrity, I'm like, hey, let's just call it out and deal with it. And then it was kind of like, I was told by the women, they were like, what are you doing? You want your work in the
mhm,
world? And they were right, Amber. I got slammed. I got absolutely professionally snuffed, loss of access to fellowships. I'm still crawling out of that hole, but I wouldn't be compromised because I was outraged that somebody would go, we're not going to listen to you speak and we're going to do the silent thing, right? And I know best. I'm up on the pedestal. And this is unfair actually to all of us, right? Because then the game of society is to get them off the pedestal, right? And
mm,
so then men have to lock down even more, women even more. I've got to keep it together. They aren't their authentic selves. And then the people who are actually in grievance can't be their authentic selves and actually tap back into who they are. Not that they are the trauma they're feeling, but even come home to that because they are not allowed to feel the trauma. Do you get what I'm saying? Yeah,
oh yeah,
that's
100%. Yeah.
outrage for me.
Yeah. And you know what I see expressed in my own family.
Yeah.
So my husband, we have two children, and he grew up as, you know, fifth generation rancher. So very much a part of the tradition and the culture, and um, the burden and the shame that can be carried thinking it's 100% up to you whether this works or doesn't work.
Yes.
And how often, you know, I will say, like, we're in this together and we're making these choices together. And
Yeah.
there's going to be times it doesn't work. Like, that's just how it is. Um,
The patriarchal
yeah,
responsibility in that is really toxic as well. I think that was
yeah, you
standing with,
know, and then your children, you know, kids are way too smart and watch everything and watch behavior and watch face and
yeah.
hear tone of voice, and um, you know, they're being brought into that from day one. um, yeah, it's a daily journey to live into our authentic selves, and to break down the systems of exactly what you're describing that places people in these insane roles, and our American identity of um, I am the sole
Yeah.
master of my ship. You know,
Yeah.
I can pull myself up. It's all on my shoulders for
It's
this to either
exhausting.
happen. Oh, and
Yeah.
it's what we are. I mean, all of us, we are so proud of our individualism and our heroicism around these individual characters, and yeah, these are narratives that we need to shed.
Well, so this is, I mean, and I think this is the power of, I want to ask you about some of the challenges the women are speaking about, because as much as, you know, this is a platform for women, this is also about, I mean, I really look at my work, and a lot of the people I work with are men. And so that position you're talking about is that patriarch who's going, how do I
Mm-hmm.
govern and manage? How do I run the cattle and have the job as the trucker?
Yep.
And like they have, I mean, we have a suicide rate of between ages
Yep.
40 to 50, 3 times higher
Yep.
amongst Caucasian men. There's a really
Yep.
particular cultural reason in
Yep.
my mind for that. I know there's a lot of debate.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see a lot of debate when I'm interacting with them all the time and they're choking.
Mm-hmm.
They're not expressing. They don't have the integrated family relationships and bonds that we're designed to have. They don't have the expression for the help that they need, that they deserve, that it is within the honor and integrity to share what's in their heart and what's happening there. And every time I work with a rancher, it's not about, hey, we start with the soil, but we know, he and I both know right away that's not going to work unless this is working and it's working with his wife and the kids and the right, and that's
Yep.
all of it. That is all of it
Yep.
in my mind. And it's
Yep.
is I think more than anything, I want community who are discovering soil to understand that unless we regenerate the social fabric, you
Mm.
know, and people actually get together and can systemically make these moves and then get up and go vote, and voting is a huge part of this. um, this isn't going to be viable. And that's what are you finding, like some of these stressors and challenges for women in the ranching community stepping into their own as land stewards, and particularly also in the
Oh,
dynamic with men? Like, let's just be.
yeah. Yeah. Um, well, it depends, of course, on how she's coming into it. And so I see young, passionate, educated women coming into it out of desire to be involved in regenerative agriculture. And I think a lot of them find a lot of loneliness. It is
Hmm.
very hard. And we had years ago, we had a neighbor who hired a young woman who fit exactly what I described. And the comments I would hear in the community were so often negative. Um, I'm not even sure if she was aware of a lot of what was being said, but things like, why would he hire her unless he's just wanting like something on the side of his wife, that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
Um,
No, like I think I'd like to share more of that, because I think women, we get together and we go, we've all heard about the same 10 comments and they're really frequent,
yeah,
and we all sit there with 1,000 cuts, not understanding the
yeah,
impact that is happening culturally to that authentic
yeah.
self.
So I have a good example actually here from our ranch. We had a big branding crew and a young woman from Wisconsin who's interning here in Eastern Montana, and she's a go-getter and just an absolute beauty. She is so fun to be with, and she came from dairy farming, so she's a hard worker. She's been around livestock all her life. Um, and so she was wanting to learn one of the skills that at that point it was mostly the men who were doing it. And we had an older neighbor who stood there and coached her. He was fantastic. And she was super quick to learn. She did awesome. And so at the end of the day, I said, you did great. I'm so proud of you. And thank you for coming and helping us. So then the next day, that older neighbor wasn't there. And she was working on it herself. And one of the young men, she missed one of the calves. She was trying to like correct the situation, but she's learning. She just needed somebody to help. And he fairly assertively just injected himself, pushed her out of the way, and completed it. And she said, if you would just tell me I can do this. And he didn't even acknowledge that she spoke. And I was watching, and it only takes a few of those times, depending on your personality, until you just, okay, obviously I'm not going to get this figured out, or I'm causing a small disaster because I didn't get that calf, and that self-talk starts, and the negative self-narrative, and then women just pull back. They just pull back from it.
That's
And I was disappointed, and I talked to her later and said, you've got it. You have to keep after it. And you're going to find people who interject themselves and push you out of the way. So when you've identified them as such, move on to somebody else, because
nice.
there was plenty of people, men and women that day, who would have been happy to say, oh, do this, do that. There you go. You've got it. And so it's really having the self-confidence to keep finding the people who are open to being teachers and sharing that knowledge. And
and I think there's also that evolutionary point where you also start going, and it's taken me many, many, many years. I'm not saying this is easy, and it's actually, I feel like I got taken down to the roots in order to do it. But there's that really tendency in the culture to be in the know, right? To get it right. That's the driver. Get it right, to be in the know. I got it right. It was me.
Yep.
And men, we know from studies, are far more vocal in this expression than women. They're going to be the first ones to raise
Mm,
hands, or not even to raise their hands, but to
mm,
speak, right? And so often it's
mm.
not even like, you know, and it's kind of an automatic, let me tell you how to do that and how to do it differently than the way you're doing it, with no inquiry as to what's happening there for her. Um,
Right.
and I remember, you're reminding me of a really small moment of fixing a plumbing leak in my father's home. My father's a wonderful man, but he also has a similar, like, don't mess with it, you don't know, don't let the guy do it, please. And I YouTubed it. And I went to the
Mm,
hardware store, and I was like, Dad, where's the power main? I'm shut, or where's the water line? I'm gonna go shut. And he was in horror. And my mom's best friend, who's a really open, beautiful gay man who runs this great charity, does drag for fundraisers for our local firemen. We have a really integrated social crowd here. It's fantastic, from rodeos to gay pride. And he went
mm.
and guarded the door while I went to town, and I got the job done. But it was a really small moment of me being like, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to have the guy over my shoulder going, don't, you don't know.
Mm.
And right. And that's my beloved dad. And we're ultimately really, but he couldn't hear what that
Yes.
was. But I had worked in that enough, but
Yes.
into academia and into my professional life, I think that's a really pervasive male female
Mm.
interaction
Mm.
there. Can be, and
Yeah.
it's
Well, and
unconscious.
in
Yeah.
ranching, you see it also from the older generation of men to the younger generation of men. And then it's like trained in and just continues on, right?
Totally. It's
I
not,
mean,
it's,
yeah, that's what I
love
see
it.
over and over. And I can't tell you quite honestly how many times that younger generation has sat at my table and shed major tears, and then said things like, you know, I can't believe I'm such a sissy, or I can't believe I'm such a this,
Yeah.
that, or the other, or it's no big deal, like whatever. Like my dad would literally kick me in the ass every morning and tell me like, you are worthless, blah, blah, blah. But, just whatever, it's not a thing. And I had listened to this and it's like, oh, these are things. I mean, these are um, things that carry through generationally. Um, yeah. Yeah. But your story is so perfect. And it, it it really takes all of the internal aligned she power to
Yeah.
say, I'm gonna just keep at this, and I don't care
Yeah.
how many times over and over days, over weeks, over years that
Yeah.
I am told. And it doesn't have to be verbal, it hardly ever is verbal. It's
Yes.
physical,
Yes.
it's a way of not being acknowledged, it's all of those
Huge.
small things. um, and yeah,
No, and
sometimes you cannot even, you just get so used to it, you lose the recognition of it even happening and being a thing until
yeah.
some external force, calls it out or reminds you.
Well, so that's really important there, Amber. That, so I want to call attention to that. Sort of what we're talking about are these collapse in identities. I can't believe how late it is. Sort of the collapse in identities around, like, I am this because I have this story about what's been said about me. Therefore, this is what I'm capable of. And we want to dismiss it, right? We want to be like, hey, that's go to the therapist, or that's your trip, or, but like it's actually a muscle set within your neurological, your nervous system, to be able to stand back and go, this is what I'm feeling. This is the belief. I'm going to stand back from it and actually go, huh, where did that story come from? Or can I choose
uh,
possibly a different route, which comes from feeling that emotive process? So is that sort of, are you guys facilitating that journey as well? Kind of skill building?
I I hope so. that is that is definitely what I hear and what I see and what I observe as I continue getting to know the different women and seeing how they're showing up. And sometimes we think it's all external things. And one of our participants, um, was invited to play play music for a big event. And before, she had been married and had 4 children. She was a musician in Nashville. And she told me afterwards, she said, you know, I forgot how much joy it brings me to be on stage. And I so often tell myself, oh, I don't have time or this and that. She said, I'm just recognizing I have some laziness to work through. I'm going to make time because this brings me joy.
Right.
And so I asked her to put together a musical piece for a video that Women in Ranching did. And she sent it to me and she said, I locked my children outside. I went down in the basement and put myself in a closet and I did this. I hope it works. And that's what it took, that 5.5 minutes of carving out of that time to bring her joy and to share her gift. And why she had to be in circle with other women to recognize and remember, I don't know, but that's what it took.
And this is part of it, right? It's the remembrance of self. I'm curious, we have a couple more questions. I know we're almost out of time. I really wanted to give time to talking about what's happening in light of, you know, what Women in Ranching has been doing and what they are going to progress into doing for women of color, in light of everything that's happening with the unearthing of everything from police brutality to the really large, finally way overdue public conversation of systemic racism, microaggressions into the, I just keep wanting to say his name, George Floyd.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you know, the first thing I want to say is, as you can probably imagine, for a group called Women in Ranching, we are predominantly white women living in the West. And when I look in my rural communities, that's who I see as people who look like me. So we are hosting a virtual conference November 13th through 15th. And I'm in conversation with Nikki Silvestri of Soil and Shadow, who
I want her on the show.
Yes,
I'm hoping she'll come
I was
here. Awesome.
Yeah, I was introduced to her through the Piscinas Ranch team.
Yes.
And what I told her was, you know, the overarching theme beyond fence lines, and this idea of community is really giving space for our participants to say, who is in my community today when I look around?
Yeah.
And what are the historical reasons for this to be the case?
Yes.
This isn't what we see today, is not a true expression of what the West is. And so, yes, I know that Nikki has incredible professionalism and grit and grace and candor, and that historical narrative to speak to this community. And then through that weekend, we'll also be spending time with women who ranch in communities of high predation with grizzlies and wolves.
Yeah.
And so looking at our wild community and how we engage. I'm talking to Robin Wall Kimmer of Braiding Sweetgrass.
I know her.
To help us explore our soil and our plant, our ecological community, like how are we engaging in this community? And then at the very end, coming back to ourselves and coming back to that story of the big leap, and how am I integrating all of this, and with recognition, like with a refreshed recognition of why this is the way my community looks, what can I as an individual do about it? What should I be doing about it?
That's magnificent. Those are some women who can really illustrate and walk you on a journey that expands you. There are few I trust to do this work well right now that really allows the balm, and Robin is one of them. And Nikki, I'm just getting to know, but I've watched her work for a while and just gone, wow, she has done her work and she has a nuanced way that connects people. That's phenomenal to hear. and of course you would.
So I'm hoping, Aurora, when we talk again after this fall, I can tell you all kinds of ways that the community is stepping forward. But for women in ranching, well, what we have done and what we will do moving on is creating and holding space for these necessary conversations to take place.
Beautiful, Amber. Beautiful to hear and see. Thank you so much for being here with us today and for sharing that, and to all the women, quite frankly, because they all are with and a part of all of us as we all are making this movement forward. Some of these questions we didn't get to, and what I would love, I know you've got way too much today, I can hear that, but some of them will be posted up in this, I'm going to put them all together. And that they're absolutely, they came through slowly, and so they just appeared now, and I wasn't monitoring the chat because of the delay as much as I want to. So this is still tricky. But there are a few people reaching out that want to speak to young farmers and also other regular sort of looking at, the idea of a what maybe is more of the idea of a commons as opposed to the concept of ownership, right? We had many nations here that occupied land. They did not put up boundaries and say, you will not pass, which is a really different way to manage land and land stewardship in general. So that's part of what's fascinating about owning colonialism and owning an American Holocaust, is to go, what happened from then to now that has made it so ineffective and disastrous when it comes to land management? And it's due with a concept reality. Yeah.
And what are the policies that have put this set of people in charge of all of this? How did all of that come to be?
100%. No, it's not separate at all. All right, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. Please feel free to reach out and post in community. We'll get smoother and smoother at this. I'm really grateful for your time, Amber, for your wisdom, and for sharing your world with us today. Thank you so much. And we'll just continue with these conversations, continue growing. Please say hi to everybody and to Ariel. So great, everybody.
I will.
I'm sure we would all love to see photos of that. That's an incredible day out on the land. So thank you so much. Enjoy.
Okay, thanks, Aurora.
Bye.
Bye.